officials to check and see how successful they've been, how happy they are with the specific regulations, and if there's anything that they would change.
Have you visited warehouses before reporting them?
Yes,
And data centers?
yes.
Which data centers do you report?
When we were up in Lehigh Valley, I can't think of the name of the one. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it.
Operational?
It wasn't fully operational, no.
No, how many megawatts is it?
No.
You know, how many buildings or square footage? Get an aspect of the size.
I believe it was going to be 3 or 4 buildings.
So these were under construction.
Yeah.
I have no objection to Mr. Severson. Thank you. Mr. Severson being an expert in zoning. I think it's questionable his expertise in data centers and warehousing specifically, but I'll leave that open to the board.
Mr. Severson, I want you to discuss warehouses and data centers and their operations and impacts between the two of them.
The municipalities that we work with, when we're looking at these uses as permitted uses, either by right, conditional use, or special exception, oftentimes when I'm working with the municipality, in addition to the land use itself, in terms of which zoning district are these uses going to be allowed in, the second piece of it is the operational performance standards, if you will, for these uses. So oftentimes we make sure that the municipality zoning ordinance has operational performance standards in place to deal with the impacts for each of these uses. For warehousing, we're looking at primarily transportation issues for the most part, access, ingress and egress into the property, often looking at screening, buffering, lighting standards, that type of thing. Those are primarily the big issues that we're looking at for warehousing and distribution centers. When we are regulating, trying to come up with regulations for data centers, oftentimes municipalities are looking at mainly infrastructure type and other impacts. But one of the ones that we're looking at in terms of infrastructure is both the amount of electrical supply nearby some municipalities. Concerns is how adjacent is it to power lines. The second one is in terms of infrastructure is water availability, publicly provided, on-lot, private provision of water. It's one of the things that municipalities want to regulate. The other things that we've often talked about with municipalities is regards to noise and or vibrations produced by the data center. And again, part of it is going to be whether it's the technologies that have come up in place, whether they're air cooled or water cooled for the running of the operations. The other thing that we've looked at in some places is in terms of air quality, because of the diesel generators that can be used in some instances, and what the impact of that is going to be. So I would say, even though both uses are most likely located within industrial zoning districts, the impacts and the operational standards would be different for both.
And would they be, in your opinion, are they different uses?
In my opinion, yes. And the ones that we've worked with, I would say that they definitely are different uses. Primarily, what we've looked at is the differentiation between storage and processing. Oftentimes is the thing that's come up. And one of the things that I've referenced, I've believe in my resume and other, when we've worked with municipalities, is we've looked at the, North American Industrial Classification System, which is a way of classifying land uses that planners and other professionals often use to determine whether a use, what type of a use, that is. And, one of the things that I looked at in terms of, NEICS, the national, the North American Industrial Classification System, has a number of categories. And there are things like mining, construction, manufacturing, wholesale trade, retail trade. There's also, transportation and warehousing, and there's a separate category, information including data centers. And one of the, within the NEICS classification system, one of the things, I can read it, this has given me guidance when I looked at and worked with municipalities. The NEICS, under general warehousing and storage, says, this industry comprises establishments primarily engaged in operating merchandise, warehousing, and storage facilities. These establishments generally handle goods in containers such as boxes, barrels, and/or drums, using equipment such as forklifts, pallets, and racks. They are not specialized in handling bulk products of any particular type, size, or quantity of goods or products. For data centers, as I mentioned, they're classified under a sub-classification, under computing infrastructure providers, data processing, web hosting, and related services. This industry comprises establishments primarily engaged in providing computing infrastructure, data processing services, and that's the term that often that we see. Web hosting services, software publishing, and related services, including streaming support services, except streaming distribution services. Data processing establishments provide complete processing and specialized reports from data supplied by clients, or provide automated data processing and data entry services. So that's the primary classification that the NEICS uses for data centers.
So, Mr. Severson, in February of 2024, the zoning officer determined that warehouses and similar non-process and storage and distribution uses were the same as data centers. Would that be your opinion?
No, it would not.
And that is based on what you just went through in your testimony, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, data centers do processing, am I correct?
Yes.
They process information, and there's processing going on.
Yeah, it's a little esoteric in differentiation, but if you look at a manufacturing procedure, you have raw material coming in, bulk materials. Something's done with those materials, they're changed in some way, and they're shipped back out. The comparison is not 100% the same, but for the most part, what I think the NEICS looks at and what most planning professionals look at is similarly for data, it's electronic goods, if you will, coming in, somehow being manipulated or processed and sent out. It's not merely storage of that electronic data in, say, for instance, like cloud storage, which can be accessed but not manipulated. So it's kind of that differentiation between physically processing a product and electronically processing a product.
And the other items you went over that you indicated would be different are mainly impacts from the data center, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So it's your opinion that the zoning officer erred in making his determination?
Yes.
And you reviewed that letter of February 26, 2024, is that correct?
Correct.
In the ordinances that you've seen prepared by municipalities, are data centers separate uses from warehousing and non-processing storage and distribution?
Yes, they are, and in many municipalities I've seen now, not only are they separate uses, but oftentimes municipalities are taking the route of adopting separate data center ordinances outside of a zoning ordinance to regulate them. Probably my own recommendation would be to keep it within the zoning ordinance. But again, they would be separate uses, usually both located within some sort of industrial zoning district.
You've never spoken to the zoning officer of the township, have you?
No.
I don't know.
Do you have any copies of what you were quoting there from NAICS?
I only have the one copy, I think.
Mind emailing or
It's on the second page.
thank you. Appreciate it. Do you agree with me that tonight the board is not required to accept your interpretation of the zoning officer's determination simply because you disagree with him, correct? I think you talked a lot about operational impacts and reviewing ordinances to figure out where it makes the most sense to put a data center, how to permit it by right, conditional use, special exception, and how to regulate that, correct?
Correct.
I think there was a little less discussion about what the use is and why that matters in this case. So the township's appeal identifies power demand, water usage, and noise as the reason it disagrees with the zoning officer's determination. In your opinion, is power demand itself a use?
That would be one of the performance standards, the operational standards that would have to be considered when the township is looking at a conditional use or special exception.
How to regulate it?
Yeah.
Same thing for water,
Correct.
noise,
Correct.
and then stormwater, parking, traffic, all of that.
All of those, yeah.
So, similar, or so let me say it this way, industrial uses can have very different utility demands, while still remaining within the same general permitted use category. And I'll give you an example of two examples of what I mean. The first was the one that I gave to the zoning officer, where you may have a 30,000 square foot warehouse versus a 1 million square foot warehouse. Their impacts are different. Another could be a schoolhouse, where a single room schoolhouse is quite different than a high school campus, but they're both schools.
Right.
And so in neither of those cases does the level of utility required, the amount of power required, the amount of impervious required, the amount of water used, affect the type of use.
Yeah, I would say,
Correct.
yeah.
So in that case then, when we're talking about what a use is and what a use isn't, all of those things that get regulated aren't really the use. The use is what is actually occurring, not how it's being regulated. Is that correct?
Right, the only exception that I've seen is some municipalities will have breakdowns within their zoning ordinance, and they'll say, small warehouse, 100,000 square foot or less, and then they'll have something other than that. And within each of those categories, then they have different performance standards for each of those.
But they're still warehouses.
They're still warehouses.
Large warehouse, conditional use, small warehouse, maybe it's not. To your knowledge, the old zoning ordinance, which I think is what we're calling it now, the old zoning ordinance does not expressly say that data centers are prohibited in the city.
Correct.
And I assume you reviewed that.
Yes.
data center is a physical building, correct?
Yes,
And they contain servers, storage devices, and related hardware.
the best of my knowledge is.
Hardware.
Yeah.
You know where they go.
Well, I couldn't tell you what the specific each of those types of things were. I mean, I saw them, but that's not my area of expertise.
So what's your area of expertise then? Because I thought it was
My area
building
is,
and warehouses and data centers.
right, not the, actual technical electrical uses which are included within a data center. I'm not aware of those because I'm not an electrical engineer.
Okay, so your expertise then is applying regulations to data centers and warehouses, figuring out where they fit, correct?
Correct. Where are the best locations within whatever zoning districts, and then also trying to regulate the impacts of those specific uses.
But you don't necessarily know what is occurring inside of those uses that you just listed.
No, I didn't have knowledge of that.
Would you disagree with me that those servers and drives store data?
To the best of my knowledge, yeah.
And that data centers allow that data to be accessed, shared, and distributed?
Yes.
Do warehouses and distribution centers have storage racks?
Yes.
Do they have computer systems and automation?
Yes.
Is it uncommon for a warehouse or distribution center to do some level of processing?
From what I've seen, most municipalities would draw the line. They don't want to say what they term what we call processing within there. There's,
So that's not defined in the ordinance, you can tell me what you're talking about.
okay, within the,
The Watts Township Zoning Ordinance doesn't only define processing. I don't believe it does. So when you're talking about processing, what are you talking about?
it's actually taking a product and changing it into something else and then taking it off-site. For the most part, what warehousing and distribution would deal with is things coming in large pallets, breaking them down, putting them on other trucks and sending them out, but not doing anything to manipulate, process, or otherwise change those products coming in. So it's mainly taking them in, sending them out in different locations. So the only terms that, if you had something actually happening to that product, then most municipalities would call that processing.
So, go ahead, sir.
And for the most part, that they want to distinguish that because they would stick that into a category of processing, manufacturing, something like that. That's just usually the way historically zoning ordinances have been delineated.
So, a big box on a pallet comes in, breaking it down into smaller ones, moving it, combining it with a different pallet, and sending that out is not processing.
Correct.
And, some of the warehouses I've been in around football season, you'll see a big thing of Bud Light or Miller Lite come in, and they take them off and they plaster the Steelers stickers on some of them and the Eagles stickers on the other, and one goes east and one goes west. Is that processing?
I wouldn't consider that processing.
So there is a level of manipulation that can occur in a warehouse.
I don't know if I would call that processing, because I'm not sure if the product is being fundamentally changed.
If you're a Steelers fan or Eagles fan.
I'm sure.
Do you dispute that data storage occurs in a data center?
No.
Okay, so your dispute is whether that storage counts under section 363.2.
My only question would be the term processing. Because I think it's fairly clear that data is stored and distributed. Whether it's processed, I guess, is the question.
And what are the effects of processing in the normal warehousing and distribution sense that cause municipalities to kick that up to something else?
I think it's being repetitious, he's already. My objective is
Yeah, I was just asking, when we were talking about processing, what are the manipulations that rise to the level of something being processed. I'm trying to wrap my head around, where that cutoff is, because there's been testimony that, completely changing a product becomes manufacturing. But there's been testimony also that taking it apart, redistributing it, maybe putting a different label on it, and making these types of changes is not processing. And so I'm trying to better establish, at least on the warehouse and distribution side, what is processing, so we can talk about it on the data center side. But maybe there isn't a clear line, is that fair? It's a gray area?
Probably a gray area, different interpretations.
Ambiguous, I'd say.
I think my personal feeling, and again, others may disagree, but I think looking at actually changing the actual product itself being manipulated in some sort of way from when it was originally received to when it goes out, if it's substantially the same type of a product, then I wouldn't see that there's any processing or that.
When I go on Netflix and stream a movie, is there processing going on, or is that just me pulling something off the warehouse shelf, watching it?
Fourthly, I would say probably yes, because you're not doing anything with that movie.
And when we get into artificial intelligence, or me asking Google, how do I get something? I mean, in my mind, that's information coming in and coming out of the warehouse with some level of manipulation occurring there. Would you agree?
I'm not really sure.
You understand that the issue before the board is not whether your preferred interpretation is possible or right in your mind, but whether the zoning officer's interpretation should be overturned as unreasonable, correct?
Correct.
When you looked over the ordinance and put yourself in Officer Steve's place 2 years ago, when you looked over the ordinance, what other use would data centers have fallen under? Is there one?
With the old ordinance and looking what was in the industrial zoning district, I didn't really see anything that was too close to that.
Okay. And so while you may disagree with Officer Spee's prior determination, do you agree with me that disagreement is not the same thing as saying the interpretation is irrational?
Objection, that's what we call for legal.
Would it be irrational for a zoning officer to reach a conclusion that's different than yours?
Yes, objection, that's not the issue.
I think that it is the issue. If the determination is not irrational, then it should be upheld. And if the determination is ambiguous, then it should be upheld. And so if the zoning hearing board can't determine, based off of the witness's testimony, that it would not be, or that it would only be unreasonable for the zoning officer to make that determination, that is when the determination fails. It doesn't fail otherwise.
Again, where's my objection? I don't even know how you can explain that.
Are you familiar with the MPC?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the provisions in the MPC that essentially say, and feel free to correct me if I misstate it, they essentially say that where there's ambiguity in the ordinance, it should be found or interpreted in favor of the property owner.
I see what it is.
And do you agree that the narrower interpretation you're asking the board to adopt is not stated expressly in section 363.2?
Yes.
Give me 1 second, go for 3 minutes. I think I asked this at the beginning, so forgive me if I'm asking twice. The NAICS is not referred to in the zoning ordinance in any way, correct?
Not that I'm aware.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Appreciate it.
The McNees February 26, 2024 letter, do you have it?
Yes, I do.
Are you familiar with the different types of data centers?
Generally, yes.
Small, medium, large?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on the municipality. It would be, what the classifications would be, but I've seen municipalities use those terms.
So, give me an example of a small data center, somebody who's got a computer that a law firm uses to store their data.
That would be small.
That would be a data center.
It could be interpreted that way, yes.
Okay. And what's a hyperscale data center?
I'm not familiar with that term.
Does the McNees letter identify the type of data center for which they're marketing the property?
Not that I was aware of.
Does it explain to the zoning officer that there are different types of data centers that have different impacts on natural resources and the environment?
Not that I saw.
And in fact, there is a significant difference in environmental and natural resource impacts depending on the size of the data center, correct?
Correct.
Do you know whether or not the proposed warehouses for which they have preliminary land development approval, do they have a tenant?
Objection, this is not a hearing about the warehouse.
We asked them a significant number of questions about what goes on inside a warehouse. I just want to know what's going to happen in this warehouse, but we have no idea who the tenant is. The uses.
That is not the question you asked, and what the data centers, these warehouses are proposed to be is not relevant. The question is whether warehouses and data centers are the same. And so I think a general question about what are warehouses works, and a general question about what are data centers works, but the preliminary land development plans for these warehouses are not.
I would agree that with the term is relevant, and the question probably goes on in general. And we're here tonight because the question is a data center similar in use to a warehouse did, the zoning officer's fees made a bad decision. I mean, the tenant is probably
But the use of the warehouse is.
the data center.
The question of, is a data center equivalent to a warehouse, don't you need to know the type of warehouse? Is it an Amazon fulfillment center, or is it something that stores?
In the warehouse in the ordinance?
Yeah, that's what he's comparing.
So I think it's a general warehouse ordinance, 2001. When was the ordinance drafted? The old ordinance?
2001,
So I think it was a warehouse in general. I don't think Amazon was doing business with that until after, as it correct? So I do want to hear what Jason read. I have questions. I mean, I'm appropriate what Jason is.
Yes, sir.
Chairman, do you have any questions? Board members, questions? I have a question. What exactly happens in a data center? How is things processed? Like, I know I think you were asking this question, but I'm very curious. I asked ChatGPT a question, what happens after that? Where does this data center get involved? Like, what is processed?
I think, again, it's the information that's coming in. If there you are asking, I guess it's the information that is actually being asked about. and it's taking the information that exists in some other location and trying to manipulate that to get an answer. So again, it's trying to use the existing information. Let's say, for instance, if you have a specific question or somehow you're processing that information, I think that's, again, I think the similarity is, as I understand it, and again, I'm not an expert in developing or operating a data center, but the difference between, say, for instance, cloud storage, where you're basically pulling material and bringing it back out, you're not asking it to do anything with that material.
Chairman, let me ask a question, and I'm curious your opinion. Based on what you just told me, are things more processed, is the data more processed than something that has been physically put a sticker on that says Steelers or Eagles? Which has done more work in processing, would you say, why?
Again, I would say probably the electronic version.
Why?
I think because you're taking stock information and asking it to manipulate to give you an answer. I think in the other case, the information, the product stays the same. It's a case of beer coming in and going out. There's no change to it. You're not saying, well, I'm going to somehow take this beer and change it into something else. It's still the same product.
How is data transmitted? Like, I remember the days of like binary, non-binary, and like we have fiber optics. So what goes in the data center, how is that different than what goes out of the data center physically?
Physically,
How is it processed?
I can't give you the details of it. Again, that's not my area of expertise in operating data centers.
I don't know.
Simple question. What are you seeing in the typical warehouse? Would you say the flow of things in and out are physical?
Yes.
And in the data center, do you see any physical things going in and out?
Not really.
You don't see any trucks going in and out, so so what you would have in there would be electronic, not necessarily a product, it's just electronic information.
Right, the product is electronic.
So one is physical and the other one's electronic.
Correct.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the attorneys?
No.
Please you sit down. Anything we have any other witnesses tonight? Is the board wishing to recess to discuss going before further tonight, or how we wish to proceed? You got a roll call order? Is that okay with the attorneys?
Defer to the board, 5 for mine. I think we can probably get through Matt's testimony in 5 or 10 minutes. Well, Solicitor Fanning, Bill.
I just, yeah, we're going back anyway.
Maybe it makes more sense to just sleep on this testimony tonight and come back.
Because I feel like maybe after your testimony, this is a good stopping point before we get in. I mean, that's up to you guys as the board, but.
I would like to make sure that all the, papers that are passed around, that we have a packet put together that we can have in our notes.
Yeah, I can,
There's only one copy of, so we're kind of trying to make notes here, referring that to the.
I will get you a copy of the minutes, you don't want to have 3 copies of all these.
I'm not too worried about the minutes, but I have a copy of the minutes.
All of the exhibits,
The exhibits.
and the township.
Yeah.
if it's okay with the court reporter, I will take those and I'll scan them in. And I'll make sure that we have a copy of it, because I need them in public. guys have a preference of when the next meeting is scheduled?
Next week, next month.
I'm looking, this is a Tuesday, I was looking at possibly, 2 weeks on the 14th. I'll be unavailable the 13th and maybe the 20th. 7th might be too close after the holiday, but for the 21st. Actually, can't do the 7th, that's the township. Correct, Carol?
Week of the 13th to 20th.
No, if it's advertised, if we mention it, we scheduled this meeting, probably notices required and everything. And we schedule it later, I would be polite, put it in the newspaper for everybody's benefit. But the laws state that as long as it's advertised at a public meeting, then it's fine. I can do 28th because I have, let's see what I'd say. The 27th or the 29th. Does the 27th work? How's the 30th work for everybody? Good. 30th? Are you guys good with the 30th?
August 30th?
Alright, then we are continued until, July 30th, 6 p.m. Any objections to July 30th, 6 p.m. at this building? With air conditioning?
I just want to she'll be in February in Croatia until July 30th. So I will be leaving Napoli here, but she will not be here. She'll be in Croatia. But she would need to be here, right?
I anticipate the audience testimony is going to take most of the hour. Matt is the expert.
Don't worry about it.
I won't get to that. I think the first hearing, okay? Thank you. All right, then we are in recess and continued until July 30th, 6 p.m. this building.